No one of them even look at me. Where will I find a rich man?
She looked shocked when he revealed himself to her, but internally, she was smiling, and that was because she had been playing the game with him all along. In fact, from the very beginning. What happens when two people get into a game with the aim of winning? There is no one to fault or tag a cheater. By the end of the day, Stella was one of those who grew up in abject poverty. Her parents were so poor that even eating 2 times in one day was luxury. It was worse because Stella had many siblings. Her parents kept reproducing despite the fact that they didn't have the resources to cater for the ones they already had. They lived in a house that was just a single room and a compound that they had to manage with a lot of neighbors. Her environment became her nightmare. Oh my god, it was either this neighbor was fighting with the next or the couple in the other room were at loggerheads again, even in the middle of the night, not to talk about the shared bathrooms and toilets. Sometimes, they would have to stay in line and wait for the person bathing or using the toilet to come out. It was pathetic. Being the first child of her parents, Stella had to start working really early. After school hours, she would go over to a rich church member's house to clean and wash the school uniforms of her children. When Stella was done, she would be given some food to give to her family. That was the bargain her parents made with this church member. Stella's labor was exchanged for mere food. And as she took the food home, her siblings would fight over it, eating hungrily as though it was their last meal. There was something that working for her church member did to Stella. She noticed how the children usually came from school and did nothing other than have a sumptuous lunch, give their uniforms to Stella to wash, settle into the living room for some screen time, and sometimes take a nap. It was something that Stella wished over and over again for herself. It made her begin to hate the condition of her family because the difference was glaring. While her church members' children had fat chicken in their food, she would scrape the bottom part of it and give it to Stella to take to her family without any piece of meat. Stella swore that she would not end up being poor like her parents. I am going to marry a rich man, Stella vowed to herself. She wanted to own a car, she wanted to travel and visit many beautiful places, she wanted to have cleaners and cook instead of being in that position. She wanted to have a room of her own, filled with beautiful clothes, shoes, and designer bags, not managing one small room with her parents and 6 other siblings. And of course, the ones still on the way. That desire to enjoy the good things of life, like she had seen in her church member's house, made Stella more desperate for something more. In fact, she aimed to be richer than her church member. Being that Stella didn't have the privilege of going to a good school, which would aid in getting a good job, she knew that her only chance at living a life of wealth was securing a filthy rich husband. Once Stella became an adult, she began to be selective in whom she dated. Her first boyfriend had a small car, but Stella realized that he wasn't rich enough for the standard that she wanted. He was still struggling to get by, and he couldn't even give Stella enough money to buy herself a new pair of shoes, or like the girls she was seeing on the internet, a beautiful wig. Please, Stella, I really love you. Be patient with me and I assure you that I'm going to get better financially. I'm really working hard. He pleaded with Stella when he noticed that she was no longer happy being with him. Stella dumped him without a second thought. Love couldn't pay her bills and sentiment wouldn't give her the lifestyle she wanted. Stella had already told herself that she would never end up with even an average man, and nothing was going to change that. He was either filthy rich or nothing. Stella's next boyfriend was even worse. He kept going on and on about vanities of this world and how he preferred his women modest, contented, and simple. Stella didn't waste time with him. She ended the relationship before it even saw the light of day. Stella moved on to others, but they were never up to the standard she has set for herself. These ones in my community are still the average guys. How do I get to the really wealthy men? Stella pondered deeply. She might not be rich or very educated, but she was extremely smart. Not like she had a choice anyway, especially if she wanted to achieve her dreams. Then Stella managed to attend a function as an usher. Through the connection of a chef, she was hired to serve the guests, but knowing that it was an event that would be filled with the rich and important men in the country, Stella's motive was completely different. She was going there to find herself a rich man. Unfortunately, Stella was gravely disappointed when she returned from the event and not a single man looked in her direction, regardless of how much she tried to get their attention. Attending that event made Stella realize one thing. The wealthy men wanted nothing to do with low-life people like ushers. So, that meant that Stella would have to think of another strategy. If Stella was woken up in the middle of the night, she would be able to list out the names of the billionaires and their sons in a second. That was how desperate and determined she was. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and entertaining stories. While Stella was going through all that, a billionaire's son, who also happened to be a billionaire himself, Rick, was having trouble finding love. Remember that saying of the man with the cap having no head, while the man with the head having no cap? While Stella was desperately on a mission to get into a wealthy family, Rick was feeling that his money was a curse to him. Rick, the son of one of the richest men in the country and a successful businessman as well, at the early age of his late 20s, had everything that money could buy. He never had to want for anything in his entire life. But even as a rich man, Rick learned early enough that there were quite some things that money couldn't buy, like loyalty, love, and happiness. Rick was happy because business was going good, but that was the only good thing happening in his life. Even in making friends, Rick had suffered so many betrayals and disloyalties. He was always finding out that people hung around him, pretending to be his friends, only to find out that they were after his money. The only person that Rick had to stick to was Ayo, and that was because Ayo was his childhood friend. They shared practically everything together, and Ayo was not concerned about Rick's status or money. Then, when it came to love, Rick suffered more. Indeed, he could get any woman he wanted. They even flocked around him like flies to feces. But Rick wasn't looking for flings and friends with benefits. He was looking for real and genuine love. Rick's first girlfriend had been the first to break his heart completely. When they started dating, Rick thought that he had found the one. Unlike a lot of men, Rick wasn't interested in changing girlfriends. What he wanted was to find his soulmate and spend the rest of his life loving, cherishing, and pampering her. Was that too much to ask? Anyway, his relationship with his first girlfriend was going well, and Rick was taking very good care of her with his money, until he found out that she was only with him for his money. One day, Rick had paid her a surprise visit, only to overhear her bragging to her friends. "I can never date a broke man. Oh. If something happens to Rick's wealth today, I'm going to dump him without looking back and find the next available millionaire," she had confidently said. Rick's heart had been completely shattered. He hadn't needed anyone to further read the handwriting on the wall. He had to end the relationship, but Rick couldn't tell whether the next relationship was even worse or not. Again, he thought that he had found love. The truth was that Rick had love to give. He sought the same love in return, as well as connection and depth, but things went downhill too fast. Ayo called Rick and asked him to come to a hotel. When Rick got there, he found her with another man whom she thought was wealthier. Apparently, Ayo, after seeing how heartbroken Rick had been from the first relationship, had decided to try this second girlfriend without his knowledge, just to save Rick from another round of hurt. He paid someone to pose as a richer guy, and he had gotten Rick's girlfriend way too easily. It was obvious that while Rick was looking for love, she was looking for the highest bidder. Subsequent relationships after that ended the same way, and because of that, by the time Rick was in his mid-30s, he was already frustrated. Who would have thought that finding true love is harder than finding money? Rick asked Ayo. He was certain that if it was a business he had been pursuing, he would have had millions of naira to his name. Why was it so hard for him? Rick realized that his money attracted women like bees to flowers, curvy and beautiful ones. But that was all they were after. "I would be without a girlfriend if I didn't have money," Rick said. That singular statement made Rick come up with an idea that Ayo thought was outrageous. Rick decided to pretend to be a very poor man to find love, concluding that it could only be true love if money wasn't involved. He needed a woman to love him for who he was, and not just the money he had to offer. Ayo didn't buy the idea. He tried to talk Rick out of it, but Rick's mind was made up. All he needed was a couple of months to be able to find his one true love. Rick knew that if he didn't take this bold step, he might never find love. At the end of the day, Ayo had no choice but to support Rick. Being that Ayo was more open to the low life than Rick, he put everything together for Rick. Ayo found the most dilapidated house in an urban community for Rick. After that, he was able to secure a job as a foil attendant for Rick. "This is more than appearing as a poor man, Rick. You have to act like it or you will blow your own cover. You have to eat what they eat, act the way they do, and speak the way they do," Ayo told Rick. Then, he spent the next couple of weeks teaching Rick things like drinking garri, eating some local dishes that he had never tried before, communicating in normal everyday slang, and trying on worn-out outfits and shoes that he was provided with. It is important that you appear as a poor church rat. In the next couple of months, we will see if you are able to get what you want, Ayo said. When Ayo was certain that Rick was good to go, he sent Rick off in search of true love, hoping that Rick would be able to manage in his new life. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and entertaining stories. But Rick had a problem with adjusting. The weeks of training he got from Ayo did nothing to help him adjust, and at some point, Rick almost gave up and returned to his life of comfort. The mosquitoes in this house are big. The toilet stinks all the time and I have to share it with a bunch of people. There's hardly ever electricity and I'm always hot at night. How am I supposed to stand for the entire day, attending to people who come to buy fuel? There is not a single restaurant around here. The local eateries don't even have good food. They make me have runny stomach. The roads are bad. Rick had a long list of complaints when he spoke to Ayo. Aside from pretending to be poor to find love, Rick got to realize for the first time in his entire life that people were really living in very terrible conditions. He wondered how they could even smile through it. Rick didn't think he could survive for 1 week, but Ayo encouraged him to endure. It was his idea in the first place anyway. Rick had to bring himself down to the level of his colleagues at the fuel station. At first, he was worried that someone would recognize him, but Ayo assured Rick that in that part of the world, no one knew he existed. He related well with his colleagues, and shortly after, Rick saw a girl he liked. She often came to the fuel station to sell snacks and bubble gums. She was jovial and kind, and Rick was endeared to her instantly. After a few weeks of talking and being friends, Rick decided to ask her out. After work that evening, as she was packing up to also leave, Rick went up to her and told her how he felt about her, expecting that she would say that she felt the same way. Much to Rick's dismay and disappointment, she threw her head back and laughed, so loud that it caught the attention of Rick's colleagues. When Rick asked her what was funny, she looked at Rick from his head down to his toes and told him that she would never date someone as poor as he was. He must have mistaken her friendliness for affection. She told Rick that she usually only dated men that wore better clothes, smelled nicely, and certainly didn't sell petrol to people. It was the most humiliating moment of Rick's life, especially as she said those words to the hearing of Rick's colleagues, and they laughed hard at him. "You should know that these girls are not in your level," they told Rick. Rick almost coughed and told everyone that he was not in her level either, but he quickly remembered that he was acting, and so he let that slide. They continued being friendly, but Rick never talked to her about dating again. Then, he met another young lady who worked at a small salon around. She seemed to like Rick, and even when he told her what he did for a living, she wasn't bothered. Rick was very relieved when she accepted to date him, but the first week, she was already making financial demands that originally Rick wouldn't be able to afford as a fuel attendant. When he spoke to Ayo about it, Ayo laughed. Rick was already asking Ayo to send some of his money to him so that he could give to her because he felt that he had seen someone who loved him even in his poverty-stricken state. But Ayo advised against it. Remember that money was the same issue you had with women when you were rich. Don't give her the money and take her to your house to see her reaction. Then you can decide if she truly loves you, Ayo advised, and Rick stuck to the advice. When he told her that he was broke and didn't have the money, he noticed that her countenance changed. However, she eventually said that she was willing to wait until Rick collected his salary. Which meant that she expected that Rick would give her her entire salary, which was way too small for him anyway. Before Rick got paid, he invited her over, but the moment she saw where Rick lived, she ended the relationship, telling Rick that she could not even be seen with someone like him. Rick was disappointed, but anyway, he moved on quickly. The other women he met were exactly the same. The moment he couldn't meet their financial demands or show them where he lived, they dumped him like a piece of dirty rag. Rick realized that love was generally hard to find, and it wasn't just about being rich or poor. Anyway, his time wasn't over, and so he lingered, hoping that one day he would find his true love. That night, it was as though the universe heard Rick's prayer. On his way from work and alone, he was rounded up by young men who looked like thugs. Rick, already scared to his bones, asked them what they wanted. Then, he went further to plead with them to leave him alone because he didn't want any troubles, but they just wouldn't let him go. Rick was already wondering if this would be the end of his life, and of course, regretting his actions, because if he had stayed rich, he would never have found himself in a dangerous situation like this when a young woman showed up. She spoke to the young thugs with a little bit of familiarity and she asked them to leave Rick alone. They listened to her and left. Wow, Rick was surprised. But she explained to Rick that they listened to her because they grew up in the same neighborhood. Rick thanked her for saving him and she introduced herself to him as, guess who? Stella. And Rick didn't think that he had been this smitten by any woman in a really long time. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment for more. Rick and Stella became friends after that encounter, but they didn't remain friends long enough. Rick summoned courage and asked Stella to be his girlfriend, and she accepted, much to Rick's surprise, majorly because he had dealt with a lot of women already. He asked Stella if she wasn't bothered about his financial state. Stella looked into Rick's eyes lovingly and said, "While a lot of people are concerned about money, a man's character is what I look out for because that is what matters more to me." Rick's heart melted. The same Stella? Even when he was rich, he never met someone who sounded like Stella. However, he didn't let his excitement make him jump into conclusion, as there were still other tests to pass. Their relationship progressed and it was the most beautiful thing that Rick had ever experienced. They walked hand in hand in the evenings when Rick wasn't working. They talked and laughed and shared each other's plate of food sometimes. Stella told Rick that she didn't want them to get intimate because she was a modest woman, and Rick respected her decision. He was not after intimacy anyway. They dated for 5 months, and Rick noticed that Stella didn't ask him for a dime. Wow. He never offered to give her anything because it was all part of the test, and Stella, on her part, asked nothing from him. Once, when Rick even complained of his shoes going bad, Stella had used her own money to get him another cheap second-hand pair of shoes. Rick was being loved in a way that he had never been loved before. Aww, he fell hopelessly in love with Stella, and he couldn't stop talking about her to Ayo. 5 months was a really long time. In fact, the longest that Rick had ever gone, and every passing day was better than the previous one. However, because of how many times Rick had been stung and betrayed, he still wasn't fully sure. Eventually, he decided that it was time to take Stella to his dilapidated house. Rick was very scared and worried. He had fallen for Stella, and he would really hate to lose her. Rick felt that if Stella turned out to be like the other women, he would just give up on finding love completely. But much to his astonishment, Stella didn't mind the first time she visited him. Stella even sat on Rick's mat and ate a plate of garri with him. Oh wow! They talked and laughed while at it. It was as though Stella wasn't looking at Rick's poor house. She told Rick that even if he lived in a rock, she would still love him and follow him. 2 weeks after that, Stella still hadn't changed. Rick felt like he was dreaming. Finally, he decided to put Stella to one last test. Ayo stepped into Rick's shoes and came for Stella. He dangled wealth in front of Stella, trying to get her, but Stella never gave in, which is surprising anyway. On the contrary, she told Ayo off, informing him that she had someone she loved and wouldn't trade him for anyone else. Stella also told Rick about the rich man that was disturbing her. Rick couldn't believe his luck. In the midst of all that, Rick proposed to Stella with a very cheap ring, and she happily accepted it. Rick asked Stella if she wasn't worried about settling for a poor man who wouldn't be able to afford a wedding, and Stella told Rick that she believed in building a family with a good man. As long as Rick was good to her, she was willing to manage with him while they built their family together. Stella passed all the tests with flying colors, and even Ayo agreed that it was time to reveal the truth to her. One day, Rick told Stella that he had a surprise for her. He got a taxi and drove Stella all the way to his mansion. Stella seemed surprised and confused. There and then, Rick revealed to Stella that he had always been a rich man, but he decided to pretend to be a poor man just to find true love. He further explained to Stella that he did it after getting his heart broken over and over again by women who only wanted him for his money. Then, finally, he apologized to Stella for lying to her and dating her with a false personality. Stella told him that she wasn't happy that he had lied to her, but of course, she forgave him and Rick was relieved. Unknown to Rick, While Stella acted like she was surprised and confused, she smiled inside because all along she had always known that Rick was not just a billionaire but also from a wealthy family. Exactly what she had been looking for all her life. Being that Stella was desperate to get out of poverty, Stella had smartly been making her research, and that was when she knew all about Rick. That night when he was rounded up by bullies, it was Stella who paid them to act that way, just to get close to him. Every single thing that she had done after that was to win Rick's heart because she knew that there was a bigger prize. Stella knew exactly what Rick was looking for and played along until she won the jackpot, which was why she hadn't ended things with Rick when he showed her his dilapidated house or chose Ayo despite his advances. Stella had dated men in better state and still left them because they weren't financially stable enough for her. That didn't mean that Stella didn't fall in love with Rick. No, she just strategically found her way to his heart. The most important thing was that they both got what they wanted at the end. Rick had a woman who loved him, and Stella got herself a very wealthy husband. Only that neither Rick nor Ayo would ever know how she got him. They got married and lived happily ever after. If you like this story, subscribe for more.